I didn't cry when my son told me I embarrassed him. I didn't cry when he said I made him look bad in front of her family. I didn't even cry when he stood in the doorway of that apartment, the apartment I had signed for, the apartment I had paid 18 months of rent on in advance, every dollar of it from my retirement savings, and said, "Mom, you can't just show up here." I was 63 years old. I had worked 31 years as a licensed practical nurse. I had worked double shifts on Christmas Eve. I had eaten tuna from a can for dinner 4 nights in a row one winter, so my son could have new cleats for soccer. And I was standing in a hallway that smelled like fresh paint and new carpet, holding a housewarming plant and a terracotta pot, because I thought that was a nice thing to bring, and my son was looking at me like I was a stranger who had knocked on the wrong door. I said, "I just wanted to see the place." He said, "Now isn't a good time." I looked past him. I could see the living room. There was a couch I didn't recognize, cream-colored, expensive looking. There were flowers on the dining table, real ones, arranged properly. I could hear voices somewhere deeper in the apartment. Women's voices, laughing. I said, "Is she here? Is that why?" He didn't answer that directly. What he said was, "I'll call you later this week, okay?" And then he stepped back and closed the door. I stood in that hallway for a moment. Just a moment. Then I set the plant down on the floor outside his door. I wasn't going to carry it back down 7 flights. And I walked to the elevator and I pressed the button and I went home. I did not cry until I got to my car. And even then, it was only for a few minutes. I had things to do. Let me back up. Because the door closing is not where this story starts. My son's name is Wesley. He's 36 now. He was always a serious boy, not the kind who got into trouble, the kind who made plans. Even at 15, he talked about getting out of our neighborhood, getting somewhere better. I never held that against him. I had wanted the same thing for him. That was the whole point. His father left when Wesley was 4. Not dramatically, not with a fight. He just stopped coming home, and then he moved to another city, and then he became a Christmas card, and eventually not even that. So it was the two of us. I worked, Wesley went to school, and we made it work. It was tight, but it was ours. Wesley did well. He went to college on a partial scholarship, and I covered the rest. He graduated, got a job in corporate sales, moved up. I was proud. I am still proud of that part of it. That doesn't go away even after everything else. He met Renee 2 years ago. She was and is beautiful. Polished in a way I recognized immediately as money. Her family owned a chain of dental practices in the suburbs. They lived in a neighborhood where the houses had names on the mailboxes. When Wesley brought her home for the first time, she sat on my couch and complimented my curtains in a tone that made me feel like she was being very gracious about them. I tried. I want to be clear about that. I brought out the good dishes. I made her father's favorite dessert even though I had never met her father and had only guessed at what he might like based on what Wesley told me. I tried. Wesley proposed to Renee 6 months after they started dating. Her family threw an engagement party at a country club. I was invited. I wore my navy dress, the one I save for occasions, and I smiled in photographs, and Renee's mother air-kissed my cheek and called me Wesley's mom for the entire evening without ever asking my actual name. Around that time, Wesley started talking about finding a place to live that was more appropriate for where he and Renee were in life. He was renting a 1-bedroom then, nothing wrong with it, but Renee's family thought they should be in a better building before the wedding. The buildings they were looking at were in a part of the city where the monthly rent was more than I made in a month when I started nursing. Wesley came to me one evening. He made dinner, which he never did unless he needed something, and I noticed that but didn't say anything, and he laid it out. He had found a 2-bedroom in a high-rise downtown. Luxury building. Rooftop terrace, concierge, the whole thing. The monthly rent was $4,800. He and Renee would cover $3,000 together. He needed someone to co-sign the lease because his credit had taken a hit after a car loan situation he had never fully explained to me, and he wondered if I might be willing to put up 18 months of prepaid rent, $32,400, to satisfy the building's requirement for a co-signer with less than ideal credit history on the primary tenant. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. I felt proud that he wanted to build something real with her. I felt nervous about the number, and I felt something else underneath both of those, something I didn't name at the time, which was a small and quiet warning that I chose not to listen to. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I looked at my savings. I had $61,000 set aside, retirement emergency fund, a little from my mother when she passed. Giving $32,400 was more than half of that. It would leave me with enough to live on, but not enough to absorb a serious problem if one came along. I asked Wesley one question: is my name going to be on the lease? He said yes. He said we would both be on it. He said it was only for the co-signing requirement, and once his credit was repaired in a year or so, he would refinance it into his name alone. I said okay. I wrote the check. I went with him to the leasing office. I signed the lease. My name was on it alongside his. I have a copy in my filing cabinet at home in the folder labeled Important, which I am grateful for every single time I think about what happened next. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. Wesley sent me photos of the apartment as they furnished it. It looked like something out of a magazine. Renee had an eye for that kind of thing. I'll give her that. Wesley seemed happy. He seemed settled. When I called, he answered. Usually, the first time something fell off was at Thanksgiving. Wesley and Renee hosted at her parents' house, a house with a name on the mailbox, just like I had expected, and I was invited. I brought a sweet potato pie that I have been making since Wesley was small, the same recipe his grandmother taught me. When I arrived, Renee's mother introduced me to her relatives as Wesley's mom and added in the same breath, "She's a nurse. She works so hard." Said it the way you might describe something quaint. At dinner, someone asked Wesley about his family background. He talked about his college years, his career, his plans. When they pressed him about where he grew up, he said, "South Side, I worked hard to get out." He didn't look at me when he said it. I am from the South Side. My mother was from the South Side. I raised my son on the South Side, and I am not ashamed of one single day of it. I didn't say anything at the table. I ate my dinner. I drove home alone. In January, I decided to surprise him. Not a dramatic surprise. I had texted him that morning and said I might stop by that evening to drop off some leftovers I'd made, red beans and rice, his childhood favorite. He responded with a thumbs up emoji. I took that as a yes. I came at 6:30. I brought the food in a container. I knocked on his door. Renee answered. She looked at me and then behind her and she called out, "Wesley, there's a woman at the door. Not your mom. A woman." Wesley appeared. His face did something I had never seen his face do before. It closed, like a shutter coming down. He came into the hallway and pulled the door almost shut behind him. "Mom," he said quietly, "I have people over." "I texted you this morning," I said. "I know, but—" He glanced back. "This isn't the best time." I said, "Who's here?" He said, "Renee's family, some of her cousins, and her uncle. It's a work thing, kind of. Relationships, you know?" I held out the container. "I'll just leave this." He didn't take it right away. He looked at it. Then he took it and said, "I'll call you this week, okay?" And stepped back into the apartment. I heard Renee's voice from inside. She said, "Who was that?" I didn't hear his answer because the door had closed. I found out what his answer was later, from a direction I never expected. In March, I got a call from the leasing office of the building. A property manager named, and I remember this specifically, Mr. Okafor. He was professional and polite, and he said he was calling because there had been an attempt to modify the lease. He said Wesley had come into the office and requested to have my name removed from the lease and replaced with Renee's. He had provided paperwork suggesting that I had agreed to this change. Mr. Okafor said that because my signature would be required for any modification of my status on the lease, they had paused the request and were contacting me directly to verify. I told him I had not agreed to any change. There was a pause on the line. Then Mr. Okafor said, "Mrs." and used my last name. I need to inform you that in the course of reviewing the paperwork your son submitted, we also found a notarized document stating that you had transferred the prepaid rent balance to him as a gift and relinquishing your financial interest in the lease. I sat down. I was already sitting, but I sat down more. I said, I never signed anything like that. He said, that's what I was concerned about. I've already been in contact with our legal team, and I want to advise you to seek your own legal counsel. I've also filed a report with our security department, and they may be reaching out to law enforcement to review the documentation. I said, he forged my signature. Mr. Okafor said, I can't make that determination, ma'am, but I want you to know that your name is still on the lease, and your rights as a cosigner are fully intact. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen with the phone in my hand for a long time. I thought about the night I wrote that check. I thought about Wesley making dinner. I thought about the thumbs up emoji. I thought about Renee saying, who was that? And the door closing before I could hear his answer. Then I opened my filing cabinet. I found the folder labeled Imperpent. I took out my copy of the lease, and I called a lawyer. What came out in the following weeks was more than I had prepared myself for. The notarized document Mr. Okafor mentioned had been prepared by someone Wesley knew, not a licensed notary, as it turned out, but someone who had a stamp and had agreed to do him a favor. The signature on the document was not mine. A handwriting analysis, which my attorney requested, confirmed it was not mine. But that was not the part that undid me. The part that undid me was what Renee's cousin told her mother, who told Renee, who apparently was not entirely aware of the full picture herself. At some point during the months Wesley had been bringing Renee and her family into his life, he had told them that his mother had passed away. Not that we were estranged. Not that we had a complicated relationship. He had told them she had died. A few years back, he'd said. He spoke of it with appropriate sadness. Her family had expressed their condolences. Her mother had said she was sorry he had grown up without that support. I had not died. I was alive. I had been alive the entire time, making red beans and rice and driving to that building with containers of food, knocking on that door, standing in that hallway with a plant in a terracotta pot. When Renee found out, when her cousin, who had seen me at the door in January and thought something seemed odd, finally told her what she had remembered, Renee called me herself. I didn't know who was calling. The number wasn't in my phone. I almost didn't pick up. She said, "Is this Wesley's mother?" I said, "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He told us you died." I didn't say anything. She said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know any of it." I believed her. I'd still believe her. I don't think Renee was part of this. I think she was, in her own way, a person who had been lied to by the same person who lied to me. She asked if we could meet. We did. We sat at a diner, and she brought the lease modification paperwork that Wesley had shown her. He had told her it was a formality, that I had agreed to everything, that it was just paperwork. She had signed as a witness without understanding what she was signing. She was shaking when she handed the documents across the table. She also told me one more thing, quietly, like she wasn't sure she should say it. She said that at her family's Thanksgiving table, after I had left, someone had asked Wesley about the woman who had raised him. He had said his mother worked in service. He had said it in a way that implied he was a self-made man who had pulled himself up from difficult circumstances. But the circumstances he described had placed me as a burden rather than a source. I had written that man a check for $32,400. I had eaten tuna from a can so he could have soccer cleats. I had worked double shifts on Christmas Eve, and he had told his fiancée's family that I was dead. My attorney sent a formal notice to Wesley. The lease remained in my name. The attempted modification was rejected. The falsified notarization was reported to the relevant authorities, and that process is ongoing. I won't say more about it because my attorney has advised me to keep it private while it moves forward. Wesley called me the day he received the notice. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let that go too. On the third call, I picked up. He started to explain. He said things had gotten complicated. He said Renee's family had certain expectations. He said he hadn't meant for any of it to go this far. He said the document thing was a misunderstanding. He said and here he paused for a long time. The other thing, the thing about what he told her family, that was just, he said he didn't know how to explain it. I said, "You told them I was dead." He didn't say anything. I said, "Wesley, I want you to hear what I'm about to say. Not because I want to hurt you, but because I need you to understand what this is." He said, "Mom." I said, "I co-signed that lease. My name is still on it. That means I have the right to be on that lease for the duration of the term. If you want to stay in that apartment, you stay in it with my name on the paperwork, just like we agreed. If you want to leave, you can leave. But I am not signing anything, and I am not removing my name, and I am not giving you anything further until I see something different from you." He said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I am your mother, and I am alive, and you need to figure out what that means to you." Then I hung up. Renee ended the engagement 3 weeks later. I didn't have anything to do with that decision. She made it herself. I respect her for it. Wesley moved out of the apartment 4 months after that. He couldn't carry the rent alone. He moved in with a friend, I think. I don't know the details because we are not speaking the way we used to speak. That's not something I planned. It's something that happened as a result of choices he made, and I've had to make peace with that. What I did with the apartment surprised some people. When Wesley vacated, my name was still on the lease. I had the right to assume primary tenancy. My attorney confirmed it. The building confirmed it. The building confirmed it. I moved in. I want to explain why that might seem strange, and why it wasn't strange to me at all. I had put $32,400 into that apartment. I had paid for the right to be there. I had been told to leave, told I didn't fit, told by the son I had raised alone for 32 years that I was better off being dead than acknowledged. Moving in was not revenge. It was just me finally being where I had already paid to be. I kept the cream-colored couch. It was comfortable. I donated the flowers and bought myself a new plant. Not a terracotta pot this time, a big ceramic one, dark green, something that felt like mine. The first night I slept there, I lay in the bed in the second bedroom, and I looked at the ceiling and I thought about all of it. The tuna and the cleats, the Christmas Aves, the signed check, the thumbs up emoji, the woman at the door, the plant left outside a closed door in a hallway that smelled like new carpet. I didn't feel angry. I think I expected to feel angry, and when I didn't, that surprised me a little. What I felt was tired, and after I let myself be tired all the way through, I felt something quieter and more solid underneath it, something that had been there the whole time. I called it mine. The morning after I moved in, I woke up before the sun and I made coffee in a kitchen that had my name on the lease, and I stood at the window and I watched the city come awake, and I did not beg, and I did not shrink, and I did not explain myself to anyone. I had worked for 31 years. I had raised a son alone. I had made sacrifices that don't have a dollar amount, and I was 63 years old, standing in a high-rise apartment on the 7th floor of a building in a neighborhood I never imagined I'd live in, watching the sun come up over a city that didn't know my name. But I knew it, and that, in the end, turned out to be enough. I keep coming back to the moment I set that plant down outside his door and walked away. I didn't throw it. I didn't kick anything. I just set it down and left. At the time, I thought that was weakness, that I should have knocked again, demanded an answer, made him look me in the eye. Now, I think it was the only honest thing I did that whole evening. I knew, somewhere underneath the hurt, that no answer he gave me in that hallway would have been the real one. What Wesley built over those months wasn't a life. It was a performance, and performances collapse, not because someone tears them down, but because the person performing them can't hold the weight indefinitely. He had to remember which version of his mother was dead. He had to remember what he'd told Renee's uncle versus her cousin. He had to keep the stories from touching each other. That kind of living has a cost, and eventually the cost comes due. Not as punishment from some outside force, but simply as consequence. What you build on a false foundation does not stand. That's not philosophy, that's just physics. I think about what it takes to do what he did, and I don't mean the forged signature or the notary with the borrowed stamp. I mean the earlier choice, the quieter one, the decision to erase me rather than introduce me. That choice required a failure of character so complete that it still stops me sometimes when I think about it too directly. Character isn't what you do when things are easy. It's what you do when the truth is inconvenient and the lie is available and no one is watching. Wesley made his choice in those private moments, and I made mine. I signed the lease in good faith. I brought food on a weeknight. I stood in a hallway and I did not make a scene. Those choices were mine, and I can live with them. What I have had to reckon with, and this has taken time, I won't pretend otherwise, is the difference between loving someone and funding someone's contempt for you. I confused the two for a long time. I thought that sacrifice was proof of love, and that love required sacrifice without limit. What I understand now is that love requires honesty, and that includes honesty with yourself. I had seen the signs, the dinner he made before asking for the money, the emoji instead of a phone call, the way he said South Side at that Thanksgiving table without once looking at me. I saw those things, and I filed them under, he's under pressure, he'll find his way back. That was not wisdom. That was hope dressed up as wisdom, and there is a difference. The strength I'm most grateful for isn't the decision to call the lawyer or to move into that apartment. It's the smaller, earlier strength, the one that made me keep a copy of that lease in a folder labeled important. I didn't know I would need it. I just knew that my name was on something and I should have a record. 31 years of nursing teaches you that. You document. You don't assume the systems will protect you. You make sure your own name is somewhere in writing. Renee called me from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. I'm glad I did, not because of anything that followed legally, but because she deserved to know the truth, and so did I. Two people who had both been lied to, sitting across from each other at a diner, with bad coffee, and documents spread between us. There was something honest in that room that hadn't been in that apartment hallway. I'll take honest over comfortable every time. I still live on the 7th floor. The ceramic pot is doing well. Some mornings I stand at that window with my coffee and I think about what I would tell the version of me who wrote that check. Not to stop her, but to prepare her. I would say, keep the paperwork. Ask the hard questions before the money moves. And know the difference between a child who is struggling and a child who has decided you are the thing they need to escape. I didn't escape my beginning. I built on it. That's the difference between us. And I think, in the long run, that will matter.